Hi again, 2033. This is Dr. Wilderman, and we are moving on to the second type of news leads, the broadcast style news leads. In other words, the leads that are meant to be heard. All right, so let's talk first about something the textbook mentions here. Your textbook mentions the 4 C's of broadcast writing. So for broadcast, think of that as TV news or radio or podcasting. Media writers are writing for the ear, not for the eye, right? And so this requires us to think differently about how we write, just like I mentioned in the print lead writing. We're going to write based on the specific medium that the information is going to be presented on. So when we're writing for the ear, some things to keep in mind. The 4 C's of broadcasting that the textbook mentions are being correct, clear, concise, and colorful. Now, those don't seem that different from writing for print or online. We need to be correct, we need to be clear, we need to be concise. But when we get to number 4, colorful, that's a little bit more of a specific broadcast term. There's colorful writing, of course, in print and digital media writing as well. But for broadcast, that's a little bit more of a focus. And it's because of these other 2 C's that I want to mention. I'd like you to think of the 4 C's for broadcast writing that the textbook mentions, as well as these 2 additional ones: conversational and current. So, broadcast writing is more like having a conversation with the people who are watching you, right? It's more personable. It's meant to be heard and digested in that moment, heard, digested, understood in that moment. And so, not only does it need to be all of these things that I've just mentioned, it also needs to be pretty simple. All right, so another mantra for broadcast writing is think of the KISS method. All right, so KISS standing for keep it short and simple. There are different parameters for writing a broadcast lead than writing the print or digital lead. We talked about how many words the print lead should be. We talked about the structure of it. And so we're going to do the same thing for the broadcast leads. Just pay attention to the differences. One way to think about the differences is to think about the total story. A short print news article might be about 250 words, but the broadcast equivalent of that story is probably going to be around 75 to 90 words because it's only going to be a 30-second spot on the news. And so the math for broadcast writing, think of it as 2.5 to 3 words per second for a broadcast script. And so 30 seconds, then the high end of that would be 90 words. So somewhere between 75 to 90 words if you have just a 30-second story. So that means that the broadcast writers have to be even more concise, and they have to think about they have to think even more clearly about what are the most important elements of the story because they have fewer words to work with. A broadcast lead then has to catch the attention of the audience and entice them to keep listening, right? Entice them to care about something that's coming up a little bit later in the story. So there's a lot going on. And again, a lot of obligation for just a couple of short sentences. All right. I'm going to mention the full structure for a broadcast story. It's called dramatic unity. Now, the full structure of a basic news story is called the inverted pyramid style. That's a different lecture. But I want to mention the full story structure for broadcast writing in the lead writing video because it's important to see in such a short story, something that could be as short as 30 seconds, right? What's the full structure versus what should the lead focus on? All right, so the full structure for broadcast story, dramatic unity, is broken up into 3 parts. It starts with the climax. It starts with what is now, what is the most up-to-date thing, what is happening right this minute, okay? So imagine that in Oklahoma, we have lots of tornadoes, right? So imagine that a tornado hits at night and the next morning, the broadcasters are reporting on it. Okay, they're not going to start the sentence with, last night a tornado hit. They're going to start with what people are dealing with this morning, this moment. People are cleaning up. People are, dealing with their houses being damaged. They're dealing with people being hurt or killed. What's happening right now that they're dealing with because of last night? So that's the first part. It starts with the climax. Then it moves to the cause. What caused the thing that we're reporting on now? So with the tornado situation, obviously it's the tornado that caused them to be cleaning up this morning, to be dealing with their damaged homes, to be dealing with injuries, right? That tornado caused the news that we're reporting on now. Then the third part of dramatic unity would move on to the effect, right? So what's the impact of this thing that happened? What happens next? What are people going to be dealing with in a few hours, in a few days, in a few months, right? What is next? So those three steps represent dramatic unity, and that's the broadcast story structure. Again, I bring this up because I want you to know that the leads in this assignment, you're just focusing on the leads. So your leads are probably going to focus on the climax and possibly get into the cause, but they probably won't get into the effect because that's the rest of the story. That's no longer the lead. All right. So if you don't get to the effect, that's fine for the lead. So something that can help us in broadcast writing is to think of our verb tenses that we use. I mentioned previously that broadcast leads have to catch the attention of the audience and entice them to care, to keep listening, right? They've got to do that in just one or two short and simple sentences. And also going back to all those 4 C's plus 2 more C's of broadcast writing, it needs to be current. And part of sounding current happens when we consider our verb tenses. So since we're trying to focus on what's happening now, the verb tenses that we use in the story are very important to us. What I'd like you to do is I want you to look in your Working with Words book before you attempt writing the broadcast leads. I want you to look in the Working with Words book and I want you to look at the different versions of present tense. Simple present tense, present perfect, present continuous, present perfect continuous tense, right? These little variations of the present tense, as well as some of the future tense, are going to be really helpful to you with broadcast writing style. All right, so the example of a broadcast lead. Let me read this to you, and in my best broadcaster voice, let me read this to you, and then we'll talk a little bit more about breaking down the structure. All right, here's an example broadcast lead. Norman residents are looking for what they can salvage from destroyed and damaged homes this morning after last night's EF3 tornado. The storm came on with little warning, ripping through populated neighborhoods, and residents are saying they didn't have much time to shelter. Okay, so notice the first sentences focuses on the climax, the now. Norman residents are digging through, what's left of their homes, the damage from the tornado last night. That's the first sentence. The second sentence focuses on the cause itself, the actual storm, the tornado. As you would continue to write the next few lines of the story beyond this lead, you would then focus on the effect. All right, let me tell you a couple more things that would help you with lead writing, why I bolded and put a couple of these words in a different color. This is an example of how we use some of the verb tenses or certain wording to give this a more present tense feel. Okay, Norman residents are looking. Okay, so instead of looked, and it doesn't sound right to do sort of like a headline style, Norman residents look, right? So Norman residents are looking. Adding in phrases like this morning, currently, at this moment, right? Okay, that helps keep it present and in the moment. And again, with the verb tense, the residents are saying. So in print, in a print or digital story, you would say residents said, right? Because we're reporting on what happened in the newspaper we're holding in our hand, or the story that we're reading on the screen. It already happened. But with broadcast, it's happening now. So instead of the residents said, the residents are saying. But notice that I didn't change all of the verbs to some form of present tense, because that is outside the realm of reality, right? I kept that the tornado ripped through, because that was last night. Okay, so you don't want to change reality. You just want to use the various present tenses to keep the broadcast writing sounding present tense and current. Okay, very good. So remember that broadcast stories often take large sums of information, and they have to filter it down into small segments, frequently 30-second stories. And they have to do that in a way that is catchy, conversational, but also is current and correct. All right, happy writing. I'll see you in the next video.